الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship but Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the last messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. We are starting this new series, and this is the second, what we call the second or the detailed series about subjects related to Al-Aqeedah, subjects that are really, some of them are in the heart of the Aqeedah, some of them are related to Al-Aqeedah. And we are addressing today, we're addressing the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are addressing some of the issues that are that get presented about the existence of the Creator. Now, one aspect, one important point that needs to be addressed, and it is very fundamental in how we think about the existence of the Creator or the lack thereof. How do we discuss whether there is a Creator or not? And of course, you know, nowadays, with the especially with the rise of science and the success that science has demonstrated, and the it's become really the gold standard for quote unquote the truth. And it's portrayed as the scientific method of thinking. The scientific way of thinking is actually the valid way of determining the truth, because there is objectivity, there is there is a way to experiment with things, so that the conclusions that you reach are actually a matter of fact. And so we want to discuss a scientific method on whether this is actually the right approach, the right method of discussing, of researching whether there is a Creator or not, for everything that exists, everything that we can sense. So what we are discussing, it's not a discussion of science today, but it's a discussion about the claim. It's a discussion about the claim that some people make and insist that the only valid way of thinking is the scientific method, and therefore scientifically you cannot reach the conclusion that there's a Creator. And if you cannot reach the conclusion that there is a Creator, therefore there is no Creator. Okay, and so now you find it is very common to find scientists as atheists. You have people who will tell you science has resolved and has solved all mysteries pretty much, and if not today, it will solve them tomorrow, and therefore, put your trust in science. So what we're going to discuss today, insha'Allah ta'ala, is to discuss what is the scientific method, as defined by scientists, as defined really even in the dictionary. What is a scientific method of thought? How do scientists think, if you wish? How is science get established? How does it get established? These are the things that we want to discuss, and to determine whether this is the right approach, the right methodology for reaching the existence of the Creator, or there should be another methodology for it. So to start, let's start with the definition. What is the scientific method? When we say scientific method, what does it mean? The dictionary defines it as it's a method of research in which a problem is identified. You identify a problem. Relevant data are gathered. Okay, hypothesis is formulated from these data, and finally, the hypothesis is empirically tested. So you identify a problem, you start collecting data about that problem, then you form some type of opinion, some type of a hypothesis, some type of a notion that relates, that's based on the data that was gathered. And based on that, you take that hypothesis, you take that idea or notion of what the issue is, and you start testing it. So we'll take an example. For example, you find that a person has some disease, and you observe, and because observation is part of the collection of data or observing the problem, you will notice that this person who is sick, they will start consuming garlic. Once they start consuming garlic over 3 days, for example, the disease went away. So you look at the symptoms that the sick person has, you look at you find that, okay, well, The disease went away. So you form a hypothesis that garlic cures that disease, that garlic is the cure for that disease. It caused the disease to vanish. Okay, then what you do, you take that hypothesis and you start now repeating what you noticed. In other words, you start experimenting with other groups of people, and you start giving them garlic once they show the symptoms for that kind of disease, and then you start recording your data. How did they respond to that cure, to that medicine, and then of course you repeat it over and over and over, where you come to the point where it keeps feeding. Let's say that you find it to be true that every time they consume garlic, that disease goes away. You come to a conclusion that's called a theory, and the conclusion here, or the theory, is basically that garlic is the cure for this disease. So next time you see somebody, or you prescribe that garlic for the person with that disease, you expect it to cure them. Another example, for example, you take water and you boil it, and you notice that, when put it on fire, and you notice that at 100 Celsius degrees, you notice that the water starts boiling, and you observe that, and you start, you set up a hypothesis, you come up with an idea, a notion that, well, the water under normal pressure is going to is going to boil at 100 degrees. And of course, you repeat that over and over and over, and which is the experimentation, or the empirical experimentation. And then finally, you reach the theory that water will boil at 100 Celsius. So in other words, this is the assumption, the theory that you have, that it will hold true for future events. If you repeat again and you try to boil water again, you are going to it's gonna boil at 100 degrees. If you give that garlic to the sick person, that sickness or those symptoms are gonna go away. So you notice that this is basically, in essence, what a scientific method is. There is a subject matter, and the subject matter, which is the subject of your study. What are you studying? There's a subject matter, and you notice that there is some method that you're going to follow in how you're going to test that subject matter. You're going to observe it. You're going to experiment with it, and you have that method, that approach of how you are going to address your hypotheses. And then what happens that after that, you reach after this experimentation, and if after that method is fulfilled, you're going to come out with a theory, and that theory basically it is the conclusion of all these tests, which you expect to hold true next time. So what is wrong with this way of thinking? I think it's a fantastic way of thinking. It's a valid way of thinking, and it's a strong method to study a subject matter, provided one is that the subject matter is under one of your 5 senses, at least. So in other words, it has to be something that you taste, something that you can touch, something that you can hear, or something that you can see, something that you can feel. It's one of the 5 senses that it has to be under your senses for it to be actually, there is a subject matter. Because if it is not there, how can you actually form a hypothesis? How can you experiment with it? There is nothing for you to experiment with. There is nothing for you to approach and to validate and to test and to empirically go and to see what this subject matter is. So the first one, to hold true, it has to be under your 5 senses, or under one of your 5 senses at least. If it is not under the senses, then it is not subject for testing. You cannot test it. You can speculate. You can provide all kinds of fanciful ideas, but it will not hold true to the scientific method, because a scientific method requires experimentation and observation. And since experimentation is not possible here, since observation is not possible because there is no subject matter. If there is no subject matter, it is it cannot be under the scientific method. So the first, for it to be valid, the subject matter has to be at least under one of the 5 senses. The second thing is that it has the study. When you experiment, when you do the observation, when you record your data, when you test and test over again, it has to be done without prejudice. It has to be done with the purity of science, for lack of better word. So you are going to address it without prejudice. You don't come with your, what you are trying to skew the data to fit a model that you want it to fit. You do not present it at tilt so that you can prove or disprove something or the other that does not suit your own interests. Okay, but at the same time, so you find that if it meets these two criteria, then it is a valid way of thinking, and it is a very strong way of thinking. And I think a lot of the science, a lot of the success for the science and the technological advancements came because of this method and its strength. Of course, this, by the way, now the conclusion, the theory that you ended up with, of course, it is used also and sometimes tested by other scientists. The science community tests it, and some validate it, disprove it, prove it, etc., etc. And but that's the scientific method for approach. You need to have a subject matter that is under one of your five senses at least. Second, you have to approach it without prejudice so that you reach a valid conclusion, a true conclusion. Now, but at the same time, you can also notice that it is limited. It is limited in scope. So in other words, it does not cover everything about the subject matter. So for it can only answer questions that are related to the subject matter itself, nothing beyond it. So it can cover the subject's characteristics, attributes, qualities, but it cannot answer questions such as where did it come from? Because now that's outside of the tangible. How come it is this way? Where did it how did it originate? Because how can you test that? How can you observe that? If it is not, something that you can experiment with. So the limitation here in the scope of it is that it can discuss the tangible subject or something that's under the material itself or the matter itself, but it cannot discuss anything that's beyond that matter. That's the question of why. Science does not answer why. It mostly answers how. It does not answer the where things originate from. It answers the things related to how things function and how they work, etc. So for a second idea or a second limitation to it, it's unable to issue a moral judgment on the subject matter. In other words, it's void of standard of morality for it to say this is something that is good or bad. So for example, it can describe how to clone a human being. It can definitely describe how to clone a human being because you already have other living organisms have been, sheep and the like have been cloned already. So they know how to clone a human being. But now the scientific method cannot pass a judgment and tell you it is right, quote unquote, to clone a human being, or it is wrong. It is morally sound. It's immoral to clone a human being. That cannot be achieved with the scientific method. Another limitation is that it cannot put a financial value on the subject matter. For example, a scientific method can take a rock, it's called gold, and take it and examine it, see at what point you can melt it, and what the resistance to temperature, the resistance to friction, to whatever, the weight, the mass, etc., etc. All of these things it can deal with it, but it cannot tell you that it's different from a regular rock, in the sense that gold is worth more than a rock, because that financial value is not something that is innate. That's something that's part of the subject matter that you're studying. It's an additional value. It's an additional, component to the topic, which the scientific way or the scientific method falls short from being able to address. That's why Professor Steve Johns noted in the introduction in his book, The Single Helix, he said that science would be unable to answer questions related to the beginning of life, nor whether mice have consciousness, as these questions are beyond the capacity to collate data and thus cannot be scientifically concluded upon. Now, so it is the problem is not with the mouse, or the problem not with their conscience or the lack thereof, but the scientific method here is not designed It is not within its parameters, its scope, to address something that it cannot experiment with. You know, whether these things beyond the tangible, beyond the things that are under your five senses, it cannot do that. And of course, we can add to this as well, that it also cannot address history. So as far as the scientific method is concerned, there was nothing called Roman Empire. Roman Empire, how do you know about the Roman Empire? From history books, not from science books. It cannot tell you how the Great Wall of China was built. It can tell you that there is a Great Wall of China because we can observe it, but we do not know how it was built. Why? You know, you cannot discuss it. You know, historians can give you how it was built, and you know what material they used, etc., and how the history behind it. But science falls short of that. It is limited in that aspect. Legislative thought, something being legal or illegal, this is not something that science can do, and this is something for the legal teams and legislative thought. It has nothing to do with the scientific way, because how do you experiment? How do you observe, etc., to come up with conclusions scientifically? Again, it cannot discuss the emotions of love, generosity, compassion, you know, conviction, such as iman. When you say, I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I believe in this, I disbelieve in that. How do you, that idea, and you know, how can science address them if they are not, if they cannot be experimented on? So the scientific way of thinking falls short of that. You know, so it's not whether these exist or not, or whether scientific method the right tool. It's whether the scientific method is the right tool to reach these things or not. So in other words, all of us know that there's something called generosity, and something called stinginess, something called love, and something called hate. Now the scientific method cannot reach conclusions of what they are, you know, their existence, because they are not tangible, you know, but we all know they are there. So it's not whether, you know, these feelings or these emotions, these convictions are there or not. It is a matter of, you know, whether this is the right tool, you know, to find them. So in other words, if you want to find these things, you know, it's like if you're looking for a piece of wood, you do not take a metal detector looking for a piece of wood. If you're trying to find a buried piece of wood, don't take a metal detector. And the metal detector can be the best in the market and doing fantastic job, you know, but it's for metal, it's not for wood, you know. And it's the same thing, you know, use the scientific method for what it was designed for, not to overstep its boundaries. So the limitation here is it's very evident that it cannot, that it's limited to the tangible, it's limited to what you can experiment with. It's not a valid method for everything that you want to think about. Okay, so which means again that and because of this limitation, then it cannot be used to discuss what's beyond the physical, the metaphysical. You cannot discuss something that is beyond that. Where things came from, how, you know, how they emerged to be from nothing to existence, you know. And this is again to say that this is not the right tool. It does not mean that you throw it away and you neglect it totally, but actually it can be a helping tool to further understand reality. So for example, we have now the Big Bang Theory, which discusses that the universe had a beginning, you know. And again, it is a theory, it's not a fact, and it's not. And when we say theory, remember we said in the scientific method, the theory is reached after hypothesis is tested and examined over and over and over, etc. So based on the scientific theory here of the Big Bang Theory, as one of the theories that try to show how the universe came to be, you know, or to say that the universe had a beginning. You know, it can be useful to know that, to say that, okay, the universe had a beginning. But beyond that, you know, it cannot be used, because again, you know, it is something that now you're reaching beyond the tangibles. So what is the right way to discuss the existence of God, if the existence of the Creator? In other words, if the scientific method falls short of discussing what's beyond a subject matter, what's beyond this, then what is the right way of thinking? The right way of thinking, regardless of the name of what we can call it, the rational way, you can call it the enlightened way, whatever it is, but every human being, including scientists, use it. So what is the right way of thinking about the existence of the creator? Well, it starts again by senses, because anything that is not under your senses, you can sit and, if you quote unquote think about it, you're actually speculating and you're having dreams. This is mere speculation of anything that is in the metaphysical, beyond our senses. If we were you to think about, it's not called thinking at all. So we start with the things that are under our senses, and the things are under our five senses. So we see what is out there. We observe the subject matter, and now this, when we observe it, and this is the way that actually thinking takes place, and it is exercised by every human being when they think about any subject matter. So you sense something in one of your five senses, then the information, it transfers through those senses to the mind, to the brain. And the brain, it starts trying to look up how to explain what we just sensed. So if the brain has some information, some previous information about the subject matter, then it can say it's a pass a judgment. It can pass a judgment. But if it does not have information, it'll just stop. It says, I don't know what it is. I can sense it, I can see it, for example, but I don't know what it is. So if you find, for example, a book, or a book that has a Greek written in it. You don't know Greek, but you know that there is a book. You know that there is some writing on it, whatever it is, some shapes that are written on it. You cannot go beyond that. But now, if you know that this is Greek and this is the way the Greek language looks, etc., you can say, well, okay, this is Greek written on it in this book. But and if you know the language, the Greek language, you can actually read it and comprehend it. But without one sensation, you feeling it, as an example, or seeing it, or hearing it, tasting it, etc., without the sensation first, and the information transferred to the mind, to the brain, with the previous information to explain it, you cannot you cannot explain it. So it all relates to whether you have previous information to explain the subject matter or not. And that's how we accumulate knowledge as we grow, and as we get experiences, and as we are told explanations of things. We are told this is electricity, this is a knife, this is a book, this is a notebook, this is Arabic, this is English. We are told this is gold and this is a rock. We are told all of this as pieces of information. Where we see gold, a piece of gold, we say this is gold. When we see something, a rock, we say this is a rock, based on the previous information. And if we don't have the information, we stand still. We cannot pass a judgment. We stop at the sensation. But really, the human mind, or this way of thinking, can go a step further. It does not just stop at the sensing the object and whether, okay, what is this? It can go further, and this is in every human being, in every human being. So we go beyond it, and we say, how did this emerge? What caused this? Or what happened for this to be here? For example, if you find for example, the piece of food that we're talking about. If you find a piece of food, what science does, it comes under the senses. Here it is. We observe it, and we experiment with it, and we put it in water, and we find it to float. We find the mass of the piece of food. We find the characteristics. You can burn it. You can do this. You can do that. With this, and that's really where science stops. It burns. It can float. This is the mass for wood, and we stop. But for the human mind, which everybody does, including scientists, as I said, we can go far one step further, and we say, well, how did the piece of wood come here? Because we see that the piece of wood cannot be moved, cannot establish itself, cannot make itself. How did the piece of wood come to be? And how did it end up with these characteristics? How come that it's different from metal? How come that it's different from iron? How come that it can float but a piece of metal cannot? So and we see that it has no will to move and to create itself, to disappear, etc. So we say that somebody put it here, and this is something that's programmed in the human mind. This is something that is innate, where you don't need to go to school for. This is everybody is built or born with this ability, what they call it, a priori assumptions, or necessary knowledge, or When we say priori assumptions, it means the assumptions, the ideas, the knowledge that requires no proof. It requires no proof. In other words, if I have to prove to you in the middle of the day when the sun is out, or I have to prove to you that there is sun, then we cannot agree on anything. Then we cannot agree on anything. And these are the things that are basic assumptions, basic knowledge, which we mentioned in the previous series when we talked about how the part is smaller than the whole. If we are going to debate whether the part is smaller than the whole, then there's not much we can talk about. Because as I said, every human being experiences this. If you hear noise, if you're sitting at home now and you hear noise, immediately the first question that comes to your mind is, what's that noise? Who caused it? Who made that noise? When you see that, when you see the door open, or who opened the door? How come that it's open? Or I closed it, how come it's open? How I opened it, how come it's closed? Immediately you look for a causality. You look for what caused this. You turn the light off, you find them on. Somebody must have turned them on. No human being, including the scientists, no human beings actually do come up to these subjects and decide, no, I gotta experiment, I have to see how you can't. This is given in the human being, and every human being does this. It's the same way when you see a house that is built with measurements, and you see it that's built of certain material, that the sidings of the house has certain material and the roof has a different type of material. And then what automatically, what do you see by that, those priori assumptions, that basic knowledge, what do you reach? You reach that, okay, somebody built it like this, and somebody who built it for a certain reason. Why is the siding different from the top? It's got to be some reason. I might not know the reason, but I know there's got to be some reason for it. And I would know that it's made by somebody who is skilled in building houses and who has the necessary knowledge to build that house in the way that they built it. Okay, so this is something that is that is basic in the human being. And the same thing when we observe the universe and we look at the human beings and the cycle of life and how the human being, from the matter of for the point of conception to the point of death, and the entire life cycle, and the way that they're made, immediately the basic knowledge, the fundamental knowledge the human being has, the prior assumptions, you come with the conclusion that they were made this way because or somebody made them like that. This is innate in the human being. Now you have some people, by the way, some scientists question this idea of causality. They tell you this is not scientific. Why? Because I cannot prove it empirically. I cannot experiment with it, so I cannot prove it. And even though really it is true, you cannot test it. You cannot test it by experimenting on it, but you can definitely observe it. You can definitely observe that phenomena in the human being, and you know that it exists in the human by observation. But now, in reality, if I may even say that without these priori assumptions, science itself cannot exist, because science uses them all the time. Scientists use them all the time. And some of the scientists who negated or their existence, who said, no, they don't exist, really they said that based on a philosophical ground, not based on science or not based on knowledge, but because they want to reach, because if you say they exist, the next question, not only about the universe and who caused and what caused the universe to be and how it became in this organized matter, but even who put these basic knowledge in the human being, the innate human being, innately. Who built the human being, every human being, without having to go to school or educate or be, with a degree or this or that. How do they think? How come that they all think in this way? This is something that is that they don't want to get away from, and therefore they deny it. But they use it as themselves actually all the time. In their own experimentations, they use them. When you look for a cure for a medicine, for a disease, when you look for a cure for a disease, you're actually chasing that based on that subject of causality. What caused this disease and what causes the cure? You're functioning based on the concept of causality. When the scientist's car gets stuck, stalls on a highway, immediately you go and say, what happened? What happened? What caused the car to stop? You know why? You know, and if you don't believe that there is a cause for it, what are you looking for then? You know, and if you don't believe that there is a cause for the disease that you find in the human being, what cure are you looking for? What are you trying to cure? Because if the disease has no cause, then what are you trying to cure? Everybody does functions based on the idea of causality, the idea of the priori assumptions, because this is something that is innate and that's built in all sane human beings. And any denial of this, you know, any denial of this is really on philosophical grounds, not really on reality or the fact that they don't use it. They use them at home, they use them in the lab. Even the calculations of experiments, when they calculate their experiments and they in their experiments, of course they know that the part is smaller than the whole. They know that it is these things are done all the time. You know that you're not going to have two things existing in two different places at the same time. You know, these are things that are given. In addition, you have also, by the way, science, as we all know, it's accumulative. We're not doing science in the 18th century today, in the 21st century. So how did we get here? It's by building on what other people, you know, actually reached. Now, this means that actually science also takes report as a foundation for its own research. In other words, to say that the scientific method is actually restricted to the subject of empirical experimentation and observation, this is partially true, or this is true for the scientific method, but at the same time, it relies on the findings and the conclusions others reached. You know, so it takes it and it builds on them, because you expect, when you take that water, you expect it to boil at 100. You don't have to do the experiment again to test that it boils at 100 degrees. You are going to take it as a given. This is something that's ended. So you're actually taking even the report, you know, somebody else's report, and nobody, repeats every single experiment for you to move forward. This is unheard of. You take it because it is established by, you know, by some scientists. You know, it's verified by maybe a peer review, and often, by the way, it is not. But let's take it in the theoretical way. It's verified by the scientific, by peer review. The scientific community says this is valid. You take that as given and you go forward with it, because again, it's a matter of trust of the report, where it came from and its origin. Okay. Now, so far, by the way, all the arguments that we have been discussing, they are addressing science as if it is an infallible, error-free, you know, it's a gold standard for truth. And the idea, the notion that science makes no errors, so that we use it as the method to reach the existence of the creator, to use it as a way of thinking, etc. This is actually erroneous by statements of tons of scientists. So Julia Shaw, who's a research associate at University College London, she said, we can still argue that the findings from every scientific experiment ever conducted are wrong, almost by necessity. They are wrong by necessity. They are just a bit more right, hopefully, she says, than preceding studies. In other words, you are trying to reach what is right. You are trying to reach, you know, the correct understanding of the subject matter that you are, but you never say in science, this is absolute, this is error-free, it cannot be nullified. Every theory is subject to nullification, and we know that the errors happen actually more often than not. And sometimes even what's considered to be a fact, really it is not. And for example, if you remember when the smallest particle was thought to be the atom, that it cannot be divided further, and to find out that actually no, it can be divided. That energy or matter, excuse me, it cannot be destroyed, and we find out that we can actually destroy matter. So the point here is that, you know, and this, by the way, does not take away from the science or the scientific method as an authentic method for understanding and for discussing, but don't treat it as an error-free, as something that cannot be, you know, that can yield no errors. It can yield no conclusions that are questionable. Because we also, not only we are assuming that it has no errors, we assume also that there is no prejudice, that there is actually there's no external influence in the scientific experiment, which is also not true. Actually, there is prejudice, and you start when we say hypotheses. You start with a hypothesis that you're understanding, and that's actually your quote unquote your prejudice. For example, Ziauddin Sardar, who's a philosopher of science and polymath, he says in his writing, How Do We Know, reading on Islam, science and culture relations, he said, it can be argued that the ideological and political factors are external to science. Ideological and political are external to science. That within science, the scientific method ensures neutrality and objectivity by following a strict logic, observation, experimentation, deduction, and value-free conclusion. This, you would think that. But scientists, he says, do not make observations in isolation. Scientists do not make observations in isolation. All observations take place within a well-defined theory. The observations and the data collection that goes with them are designed either to refute a theory or provide support for it. And theories themselves are not plucked out of the air. Theories, he says, exist within paradigms. That is a set of beliefs and dogmas. The theories are within paradigms, and it's a set of beliefs and dogmas. Okay, so it is basically you start your information when you collect the data and you come up with a hypothesis and you come up with a theory and you start dealing from within that theory to prove or disprove. You already have an angle at where you want your research to go. As a matter of fact, we have to keep in mind, always when we are shown this, when we shown scientists, they're always wearing this white lab coats and with the crazy messy hair, and they're like they only worry about and they're concerned about science and the authenticity of the science, and this is of course that couldn't be further from the truth, because at the same time it neglects that science in general is conducted within a political and financial environment, where lobbyists, special interest groups, financial strings, they play fundamental roles in science. These scientists do not function with unlimited amounts of money and funding for their experimentation. And who has that interest in that experiment to get its findings, so that they would finance it, so that they would support it financially? Which institution would put the millions, if not billions of dollars to buy the necessary equipment to perform, these experimentations? So in other words, we are functioning aside from the scientists themselves and their own limitations and beliefs and value systems and interests, etc. You are functioning within a certain environment, a political environment, a financial environment that actually influences your experimentations and the way, if not your conclusion, the way you read the data, the way that you gather, and the way you understand the data that's presented. So, for example, let's take a couple of examples. Medicines often are cleared by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and then you find them after being approved that they are healthy and they're a good treatment for this disease and that disease. You find them getting pulled off the market because they cause death, they cause this, they find out that the study that was done was flawed. They find this, because the research here again is funded by interest groups to provide to prove or disprove something. There's an article in the and this is related to something that now we're seeing with vaping, the e-cigarettes, where you have many deaths that have occurred already because of e-cigarettes, and amongst the teens and the teenagers, you find and just if you want to know how decisions are made, that it's not pure science with no outside influence. There was an article in the New York Times that appeared on September 2nd, 2016, and it was titled "A Lobbyist Wrote the Bill." A lobbyist wrote the bill. Will the tobacco industry win its e-cigarette fight? Okay, and basically, you know, if you want to make something legal or illegal, this is not, you know, this is something the Congress and the Senate does, and these are the people who sponsor bills and make them like that. So when they wanted to make, you know, the lobbying, they were lobbying for a bill to pass to allow tobacco, to allow the e-cigarettes, you know, to be produced, and to regulate certain laws, to regulate, you know, certain aspects of the e-cigarette consumption, you know, and this is aside from the study. But even the bill itself was given by the tobacco industry. So you're talking about how did the FDA come to approve? How did the e-cigarettes come to be approved as to be, you know, I don't want to say healthy, but they do not cause the death and the sicknesses that they caused, you know, recently, where people were not, you know, their lungs got messed up and they ended up dying because of vaping, you know, with the idea that, well, it's less in nicotine than regular cigarettes, and therefore it's, you know, safer than that. And it turned out to be exactly the opposite. But this is a product of science, you know, a science that is influenced by external factors. Definitely, if the science was in its pure form, you know, and given to scientists who sat and they discussed it without outside influence, they would have known the dangers and the health impact of smoking, etc. But this is only in you know, in the perfect world. In the real world, it doesn't happen this way. In the real world, you have deadlines, you have budgets, you have, you know, you have political pressure, you have data that's manipulated, etc. So I'm saying this is not to lose trust in science, but to know it has limitations. It is not the one and you know, in the you know, to solve all problems. So by definition, and in addition to what I just said, the scientific method, as I said, it's the best explanation for what exists now. It does not claim to be perfect. It does not claim that what it reaches, it cannot be nullified. It is what we know now, and this is what part of what makes it fantastic and powerful. But at the same time, also because of that, the very same reason, you know, it cannot be used to explain about anything that's beyond the physical, anything that relates to the existence of the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's limited in the scope that it functions. So to make this empirical method as the sole method for accepting information, you know, you end up not accepting major aspects of life, as we mentioned before. So how does Islam then, how does Islam acquire, you know, or how does Islam say that we should acquire the Aqeedah, or how do we acquire our Aqeedah in Islam? Islam acquires the Aqeedah, or says that we should acquire the Aqeedah by using our intellect in coordination with our fitrah, recognizing our fitrah, and I will explain. Meaning that first of all, it recognizes that the human being, the feeling of imperfection, the feeling of incompleteness that every human being has, the feeling that there is something that is, you know, above and more powerful than this being. And then with that recognized, it addresses the mind, addresses the intellect to think and to question, you know, to see that this is that this did not come from nothing, you know, to use your basic knowledge, your priori assumptions, to reach that, you know, there is a magnificent creator, you know, beyond this universe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ وَالْفُلْكِ الَّتِي تَجْرِي فِي الْبَحْرِ بِمَا يَنْفَعُ النَّاسِ وَمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مِن مَّاءٍ فَأَحْيَا بِهِ الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا وَبَثَّ فِيهَا مِن كُلِّ دَابَّةٍ وَتَصْرِيفِ الرِّيَاحِ وَالسَّحَابِ الْمُسَخَّرِ بَيْنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَعْقِلُونَ. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the night and the day, and the great ships which sail through the sea, with that which benefits people, and with what Allah has sent down from the heavens of rain, giving life thereby to the earth after its lifelessness, and dispersing therein every kind of moving creature, and His directing of the winds and the clouds controlled between the heavens and the earth are signs for people who use reason. It is innately, we know that the variation of the heavens and the earth, the alteration between the night and the day, the sun, the moon, the system that we observe. Innately, we say any system that's being put as a system, automatically you know that there's somebody who organized it, somebody who's capable to provide that system. And of course, with the magnificent system of the universe that we live in, it only demonstrates, you know, the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ability and the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In another ayat, إن في السماوات والأرض لآيات للمؤمنين وفي خلقكم وما يبث من دابة آيات لقوم يوقنون واختلاف الليل والنهار وما أنزل الله من السماء من رزق فأحيا به الأرض بعد موتها وتصريف الرياح آيات لقوم يعقلون تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق فبأي حديث بعد الله وآياته يؤمنون. And in the creation of yourselves and what he disperses of moving creatures are signs of people who are certain in faith. And in the alternation of night and day, and what Allah sends down from the sky of provision and gives life thereby to the earth after its lifelessness, and his directing of the winds are signs of people who reason. These are the verses of Allah, the signs of Allah, which we recite to you in truth. Then in what statement after Allah will and his verse will they believe? And it recognizes, as I said, the innate feeling that they are weak and they need for the Creator subhanahu wa ta'ala. Listen to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran al-Kareem. وَإِذَا مَسَّ الْإِنسَانَ الضُّرُّ دَعَانَ لِجَنْبِهِ أَوْ قَاعِدًا أَوْ قَائِمًا فَلَمَّا كَشَفْنَا عَنْهُ ضُرَّهُ مَرَّ كَأَن لَّمْ يَدْعُنَا إِلَى ضُرٍّ مَسَّهُ. And when affliction touches man, he calls upon us, upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether lying on his side or sitting or standing. If there is a problem, you automatically feel weak and you start asking Allah, Ya Allah, help. But when we remove him from his affliction, he continues in disobedience as if he had never called upon us to remove an affliction that touched him. And this is exactly the nature of the human being. You know, that when you have a problem, automatically you start crying and you start asking for help because you recognize your weakness and your inability to solve your problems. But once you feel comfortable, then you know, I have it made and I made it myself. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and beautifully describes how the human being, you know, thinks. وَإِذَا مَسَّكُمُ الضُّرُّ فِي الْبَحْرِ ضَلَّ مَنْ تَدْعُونَ إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ فَلَمَّا نَجَّاكُمْ إِلَى الْبَرِّ أَعْرَضْتُمْ وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ كَفُورًا فإذا ركبوا في الفلك دعوا الله مخلصين له الدين فلما نجاهم إلى البر إذا هم يشركون. When he says, and when adversity touches you at sea, lost are those you invoke except for him. You know, you start realizing nothing's going to help you, not your mother, not your father, not the idol that you worship, not the priest in the church, nobody is going to be able to help you, you know, except whom? Except him subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when he delivers you to the land, you turn away from him. And ever is man ungrateful. Because once you're in the land, you feel that you're safe. And you're not safe on land. You're not safe on land, you're not safe in your home, you're not safe in the street, you're not safe on earth. But this is what the human being is. But this is innate in the human being. The feeling of weakness and the feeling of incompleteness, the feeling of the need for assistance and the need for help, especially at the time of trouble. Especially at the time of trouble. You know, so Islam addresses the human mind. Addresses the human mind, tells you to think about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Think about his existence. Think about all the system that you are living under, you know, and use the basic knowledge that you have, that you use in everything that happens to you. You know, when you see a window open, you say, who opened it? You see an object is sitting there, you say, how come where did this come from? You know, this is exactly, you know, really encapsulated in or put in the single rhetorical question that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Were they created out of nothing, or did they create their own selves? Did they create themselves? This is because the basic knowledge that we have, the assumptions that we have, the innate assumption is that we know that you do not control your start, your life. You do not control your death. You do not control, you know, your height. You do not control your color. You do not control, you know, what you're born with, etc. All of this is something that is imposed on you. And when it's imposed on you, the question again innately is asked, who imposed it? You know, and now, but keep in mind, when we say Islam to talk to the, address the mind and told the Muslim to think and to question, or told the human being to think and question, it does not mean that the mind has absolute power, because we recognize the mind has limitations. What are the limitations? It cannot think about anything that's not outside, that's not within the five senses. It cannot pass judgment unless you have previous information. So even if you sense something, if you sense something, it does not mean that you will understand what it is without somebody feeding you that information to explain that. So automatically, it means that your mind now is limited. We do not comprehend, what's beyond this universe. Well, all we know is that the fact that this universe exists, the fact that this human being exists, that this system is in place, it shows that somebody made that system. And when we look at the system and how great and how complex and how magnificent it is, we can only reach that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or that creator, that maker who made and designed and systemized everything that exists, also has this unbelievable power and unbelievable ability because of that. We know that, for that maker to exist, it cannot have the same qualities as what was made, meaning he himself. And when I say he, I don't mean a gender, but in Islam, because Allah Ta'ala referred to himself, we say lafz al-jalala, is in the masculine form. So we say he, because that's what the form that he used in the Quran. But that he is not subject to any limitation, whether in gender, whether in beginning, or in power, or in, so he cannot be created like his own creation, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so the mind can take us only to the fact that there is a creator, that he, subhanahu wa ta'ala, some of his attributes, the fact that he is alive, that he's a living being, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he has no start, no end, because again, if he has a start, somebody would have had to start him, which means that he's not the creator again, which means that, and if he does not have an end, because if he has an end, subhanahu wa ta'ala, it means he had a start, that he's all knowledgeable, he's all, Hakim, Alim, because again, the creation itself requires such attributes. But beyond that, we do not have more than that. We do not have, then what do? Then we rely on reports that are coming. In other words, anything that's beyond our senses, and we don't have information about it, we rely on the report, provided that it's validated. We do not take hearsay. And in Islam, alhamdulillah, for the ni'mah of Islam, the blessing of Islam, in Islam, we do not follow, some stories. Alhamdulillah, Islam is very well structured in how we take our knowledge, how we take our reports. So we have an entire ilm, an entire aspect of knowledge that discusses how we validate our reports, what type of reports there are, what falls where, whose report is accepted, who's not, who has an authority, whose report has an authority, who's not. All of this is well defined within Islam. So if we cannot think about something, then we rely on what? We rely on the report. How do we know that there is heaven and hell, and there's accountability, and there's a day of judgment? Based on the report. It's in the Quran al-Kareem. And we know for a fact that the Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because as we mentioned in the previous series, and how we discussed the miracle of the Quran al-Kareem and the i'jaz of the Quran al-Kareem. So anything that's beyond the senses, the ghaib, we rely on that. And actually Islam tells us not to speculate, not to sit and speculate and come up with fanciful ideas that they're not based in evidence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يُجَادِلُ فِي اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ وَلَا هُدًى وَلَا كِتَابٍ مُنِيرٍ. And of the people is he who disputes about Allah, his attributes, subhanahu wa ta'ala. يُجَادِلُ فِي اللَّهِ. You are discussing Allah ta'ala, as if he, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in front of you. You have no knowledge of Allah ta'ala, but what he gave you. Or guidance, you're not guided. Or enlightening book, meaning there's nothing to tell you about the report from the unsensed or beyond the senses in the ghaib, so that you can argue based on. Allah Ta'ala condemns the people who speculate about the ghaib. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ لَيُسَمُّونَ الْمَلَائِكَةَ تَسْمِيَةَ الْأُنْثَى وَمَا لَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ عِلْمٍ إِن يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا. And those who do not believe in the akhirah, they call the angels, or they label the angels as what? As females. وَمَا لَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ عِلْمٍ. You have no knowledge in that. How did you reach that? How do you know the gender of angels? إِن يَتَّبِعُونَ الظَّنَّ. They only follow conjecture. وَإِنَّ الظَّنَّ لَا يُغْنِي مِنَ الْحَقِّ شَيْئًا. And conjecture does nothing in comparison to the truth. And this is what has to be clear, that we say Islam tells us to use our minds and intellect, but it is an organized usage of the mind. We do not say it is the gold standard for everything, because it is not. In the ghaib, we do not have access to it. And even the scientists, and we'll talk about it insha'Allah ta'ala a little bit, maybe either next time or next session or the session after, when we talk about the people who try to explain the existence of the universe, when we talk about Darwinism, and how scientists started speculating about extraterrestrial people or beings who come and they put us on this earth just to escape the idea of saying that there is a creator. So that's really more likely than the creator. Again, there are limitations for it. So when it comes to things beyond the senses, we rely on the report provided that is validated. Okay, so based on that, we can notice that Islam, is not faith as defined in the Western culture. Faith as defined in the dictionary. It's a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. So Islam, our iman, our tasdeeq, our yaqeen, our conviction in our aqeedah, in the existence of the creator, in this example, is not a faith that is not based in proof. So, and really it is incorrect for anybody to use the word faith to describe Islam. My faith is this. Why would you take this the entire role of the mind, which Islam emphasized and put with the ni'mah, the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, to be able to think and to question and to conclude with that about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and about His risala, His message. Why would you take that and you shrink the deen and make it shrivel into a midget of something called just a faith, just a blind shot in the dark? As one professor, who was talking about the course was about science and society and how they relate. When he defined faith as leaping in a dark room, hoping that there is ground to catch you. We are Muslims. We don't jump. You don't jump in a dark room hoping the ground to catch you. What kind of nonsense is that? That nullifies the entire role of the mind. The thing that makes us special and different from animals, from other creation, is the ability to think and the ability to to question and the ability to scrutinize. Then automatically we're going to throw that and start jumping in dark rooms hoping there's ground, and not at all. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Islam does not put us in that position, but rather Islam is a structured belief, and the role of the mind is structured in Islam, and how we reach the existence of the creator, the limits of the mind when it comes to the creator's attributes and the things that relate to him, the things about the ghaib. And we know where the mind stands, because if subject matter is not under our senses, we cannot think about it. Unless we have previous information about it. But even then, even if a subject matter is not under our senses, and we have previous information, we cannot think. Meaning now about the Day of Judgment. Day of Judgment, we have information about it in the Quran, in the Sunnah, we have information about it, but we cannot think about it. We only stop at what was given to us. We do not go beyond it. And why? Because we cannot think about it. The same thing if we don't have the information, but we have the subject under our senses. So we have that structure in Islam, and how we believe and how we view evidence and how we evaluate them, etc. The scientific way of thinking is a subset, is only part of how the human being, the normal human being, the average human being actually thinks and derives conclusions. So we need to be clear that Islam has no conflict in science. We do not have, not on theological grounds, meaning not on textual grounds. There is no conflict in our religion, our deen, between science and the deen itself, nor on historical ground. Historically, we did not have a conflict between Islam and science. On the contrary, the stronger Islam was, etc., the Muslim civilization grew, and Muslims excelled in science, in all kinds of sciences. As a matter of fact, if we talk about the scientific method specifically, some observers, some people attribute the scientific method and its development to to Ibn al-Haytham. Ibn al-Haytham, who died in 1040. He used a scientific method, and some say even that he was one of the major components in developing it. It doesn't matter, really. It really doesn't matter. But he used it. Other scientists used it. Muslims used it. So we do not have that conflict between science and Islam. And at the same time, we know the boundaries. We know the limitation of the scientific method. And this is not to take away from it anything, but not to give it more than it deserves. It's used best where it is designed, for what it's designed for, understanding its limitations. And at the same time, we know that the innate, the basic knowledge, the priori assumptions that the human being has is really what makes science function, what makes intellect functions, what makes, you cannot do much without them, So this is really what I want to talk about, the scientific method. And inshallah ta'ala, for our next session, it will be about Darwinism and the existence of God. And this is, of course, now this is the new issue about Darwinism and as used to show that there is no God. And we want to discuss, inshallah ta'ala, that and see whether this is something that is true or not. Okay. Alaikum assalam. Alaikum assalam. Any questions or any comments? There is no one. So just about the question about the scientific, resources. Really, there is no one scientific or one reference that I refer to. But in terms of scientific method, you can find it in Wikipedia. You can find it in really. Any science book, even in the science dictionaries, they define it. And of course, just to keep in mind, it's not the definition itself that when we talk about scientific, it's not like a container in or out kind of thing, but it's a method. It's a methodology of approaching the study of subject matter, and that is what makes it into fall under the scientific method or not. And it is, again, if it is stripped from all the exterior pressures and it's stripped from the prejudices of the scientists, it is a powerful method of thinking, of examination of tangible subjects, of things under within your five senses, because they give you deep knowledge of the subject matter. When you take any item, and I mean, really, and just look at how science brought it to where we are right now. Whether in every field, it is it's mind blowing, the power that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala put in the human mind. But the problem is, it has become more of a holy cow now. It's the gold standard, even for the areas that it says I have nothing to do with it. So now we have scientists who come and tell you there is no God. So you skip the idea of observation, the idea of experimentation, the idea of the a priori assumptions. All of that is skipped, and you decide there is no God. How can you prove science? And they tell you cannot prove it. Those are the fair ones. They tell you scientifically you cannot prove it. Yeah, of course we say that scientifically you cannot prove it, because science has limited, a limit that cannot go beyond. But you have now scientists who come and they made the conclusion that there is nothingness, meaning they affirmed the nothingness. That you need a proof for. So to say that, I'm going to say I cannot reach a conclusion is one thing, but to say that actually there is nothing, that's an affirmation for a negation. That you require proof. And now the arrogance is that they got to the point where they start, even just simply because I'm a scientist, I can actually speak about that and tell you that about even the things that I can experiment with and I can and things that I cannot. And inshallah ta'ala we'll touch on that inshallah ta'ala in next session when we talk about Darwinism. Brother Rashid is saying, many years ago you mentioned about Allah. When asked what he's like, his form, you said that he's exactly not what you may think he is, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not like anything in his creation. Exactly. And this is the statement is that whatever the mind thinks Allah ta'ala is, it is not, because after all the mind can only think within the tangibles, within the senses, and with previous information. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other words, everything that the mind produces is relative to the five senses, and it's limited to the capability of the mind. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond time and beyond space. Even the most creative of people now in Hollywood's probably the most creative people that you run into. When they want to bring you a being that's outside of the universe, you find them still really pretty much resembles either a human being or an animal or a cross between them. But you'll still find feet, you'll still have some form of hands, some form of head, some form of eyes or eye or something like that, because the human mind, the human being, cannot go outside of its reality. And so whatever we think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, he is not subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says nothing is like him subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's nothing like him. So whatever we think he is not subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, inshallah ta'ala, next time it will be about Darwinism and evolution. I will try to cover it in one session again, because just to keep things in perspective what we're trying to accomplish. We want to explain what the theory is about, and we want to explain also how it's in relationship to the existence of the creator. So we're not going to be critiquing the theory from end to end. That's not the goal of it, but we want to present what it is, what is now the most common, or the most accepted, the widely accepted components of it, and how it relates to the existence of the creator subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, as in everything, we have to keep the idea of the scientific method and the limitation of the scientific method and the role of the scientific method. We have to take that in mind. And we will see a lot of issues when we discuss it, insha'Allah ta'ala, next session, bi-idhnihi azza wa jal. Yes, insha'Allah ta'ala, it will be the week after, not next week, but the week after. Any question, any comment? Okay. Allah jazakum khair for joining, and inshallah ta'ala we will see you in a couple of weeks. If you have any question, please just post it on the page, and somebody inshallah ta'ala will get in touch with you. If you have any comments, any correction, any input, it's mostly it's most welcomed inshallah ta'ala. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير والسلام عليكم.